The roar of the Lamborghini echoed through the streets of Manhattan as Christian Wellesley, at 35 years old, with his high-end sunglasses and wrapped in the aura of his expensive cologne, relished the power and control his luxury car offered him. There are paths one does not choose, but that choose us to reveal the truths we had forgotten to seek. It was a bright day, one of those days where the sun seemed to bathe everything in a golden light. But his mind was miles away, lost in futile thoughts. With life under his control, Christian was the portrait of success. A billionaire thanks to his prosperous tech startup. A die-hard bachelor accustomed to having everything he wanted by simply giving orders. He was an empty man, yet ignorant of his own emptiness. Trapped in a life that had become routine in its ostentation, uninterested in having children or serious commitments. He had lived his entire life surrounded by fleeting, insignificant romances, caring only to enjoy the moment. Destiny doesn't find you in the crowd, but in the solitude of your heart, where everything you need has been waiting to be discovered. As he stopped at a pedestrian crossing, his eyes wandered along the sidewalk without expecting to find anything out of the ordinary. But then he saw them. A young woman hurried along, leading 4 children who couldn't have been older than 5. The scene would have been ordinary if not for one detail that left him breathless. The children were his spitting image. It wasn't just a vague or casual resemblance. It was like seeing 4 childhood versions of himself beside that woman, an energetic and determined figure. Christian frowned, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Impossible, he murmured to himself, but he couldn't look away. His heart beat with unusual intensity, accelerating as his mind sought an explanation. The children of the soul are born not of blood, but of love, read a mural in the distance, visible clearly from where he was. Without thinking twice, he sharply turned in the direction of the crossing. The Lamborghini roared once more, darting through the streets until he managed to intercept the woman at the corner. He stopped the car and jumped out, his sunglasses shielding his face. She froze, surprised by the sudden appearance of this elegant and confident man. The kind of man one would never expect to encounter around a corner in New York. But what truly unsettled her was the way he looked at her children. The children, curious, looked at him without understanding. They were 4 little ones with light hair, bright black eyes, and mischievous expressions that reflected an undeniable innocence. As for that resemblance, it was undeniable. Christian stood still for a moment, observing them, before taking a step toward her. His voice was deep, laden with a wonder he couldn't hide. "What's the name of these children's father?" he asked bluntly, his tone impatient. The woman, Jaime Rodriguez Alvarez, a Mexican immigrant with a tired but determined face, looked at him distrustfully. Her maternal instinct kicked in immediately, protecting her children. She wasn't used to being approached like this, especially not by someone dressed like Christian, exuding wealth and power. "That's none of your business," she responded coldly, squeezing the hand of one of the children. Her eyes, filled with a mix of pride and defiance, never left him. "Yes, it is," replied Christian, slowly removing his sunglasses and revealing his light eyes, the same eyes the children bore on their faces. "These children are identical to me. You can't deny the obvious." The ensuing silence was deafening. Amy froze, her gaze shifting between the children and Christian. The resemblance was irrefutable, like drops of water. She felt a lump forming in her throat. "It can't be," she thought, her mind racing in every direction. "They don't have a dad," Jaime said, her voice breaking but filled with a firmness that attempted to protect her secret. "They're just my children." Christian took another step toward her, his gaze intense but calm, as if unwilling to intimidate, but also unwilling to leave things unresolved. He knew he was about to change their lives, and his own, in an irreversible way. "Look, I'm Christian Wellesley, and I swear to God I don't want to harm you. But I need to know the truth. Who is the father of these children? It's impossible, this genetic coincidence, as I've never seen you before in my life, Christian asked, a mixture of confusion and determination in his voice. In the back of his mind, a memory began to take shape, a distant recollection of a donation he had made years ago, a fleeting thought that faded instantly. Jaime looked at him sternly, struggling internally with her emotions. She wanted to protect her children. She wanted to get away from this man who could complicate their lives. But she couldn't deny what was in front of her. He looked like the biological father of the quadruplets. "You have no right to ask me these questions," she replied, her voice rising slightly due to the tension. "They have no father, only me." Christian listened, but didn't let her words push him away from what he was feeling. He knew deep down that these children were a part of him. He sensed an inexplicable bond, a connection he had never imagined. "Listen, I don't know how something like this could happen. I don't have a twin brother. I don't even have siblings," he said, his tone now softer. "But there must be a reason. Please let me understand." The woman grew paler, unable to respond or offer explanations. Christian looked at her, the wheels of his mind turning at full speed. Something in his memory was beginning to take shape, a flash of a decision he had made years ago, something he never thought would have consequences. He took another step toward the woman, his eyes now locked on hers, searching for an answer they both knew, though it hadn't yet been spoken. "Tell me one thing," he said, his voice deep but laden with an emotional weight he had never felt before. "Did you go to the Glenview fertility clinic 5 years ago?" Jaime stood still as if struck by an electric current. Her face grew even paler, and her lips began to tremble slightly. She tried to maintain her composure, but the truth poured out from every pore of her skin. Memories of those difficult days, filled with uncertainty and loneliness, flooded her mind like a storm. She lowered her gaze, unable to hold Christian's intense gaze any longer. The children continued to play, oblivious to the tension weighing down on the adults. She stammered, swallowing hard, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I did." Christian felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Everything made sense, but in a way he had never imagined. Years ago, when his stock market ventures were just beginning and he faced financial difficulties, he had made a decision he rarely spoke of. In a moment of desperation, he had decided to donate sperm under a strict protocol to get some quick money. It wasn't a decision he was particularly proud of, but back then, it seemed like an easy way to alleviate his financial problems. As a precaution, the high-reputation clinic had assured him that his sperm would only be used once, exclusively for a single woman. Now, before him walked 4 children, each bearing features that mirrored his own face like tiny reflections. He ran a hand through his hair, incredulous at what he was discovering. "So?" he murmured, taking a deep breath as if he might run out of oxygen. "They're my children." Jaime, with her eyes still fixed on the ground, nodded slowly. The reality of his words fell like a crushing truth, enveloping them both in a thick, difficult silence. Christian then spoke with great firmness and determination, his eyes reflecting immense anguish. "Get in the car with the children. Don't ask questions. I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." Jaime looked at him in disbelief, frightened by the intensity of his words. She didn't know what to do. The world seemed to have turned upside down in seconds, but something inside her told her she needed to listen, to discover who this man really was, a man who, somehow, was already part of her children's lives. Without saying anything more, she looked at the 4 children around her, and after a moment of hesitation, nodded. "All right," she murmured, unaware that this simple gesture would change the course of their lives forever. The sound of the car starting filled the street as Christian drove toward the unknown, with an overwhelming sense of responsibility and destiny beginning to take shape in his heart. Inside the car, a heavy silence filled the space, so dense that it seemed to crush any attempt at speech. Christian kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind was elsewhere. The Lamborghini's roar, which usually gave him a sense of power, was now just background noise. Jaime, sitting beside him, looked forward, ignoring the luxury around her, focused on the children in the back seat, their small bodies moving with the innocent calm that came from ignorance of the situation. Finally, Christian broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with restrained tension. "What's your name?" Christian asked with genuine curiosity. "Jaime Rodriguez Alvarez," she replied, letting her voice escape as if it were a murmur. "Why?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the road. "Why did you have to resort to sperm donation?" He paused, carefully choosing his words, trying not to sound harsh. "A woman like you, Jaime. So beautiful, so strong. How come you didn't have someone, a partner, to share something so important with?" Jaime, surprised by the question, turned her gaze to the window. Her lips pressed slightly, searching within herself for words that still hurt. She kept silent for a few more seconds before sighing deeply. With the same calm she had used to face life's storms, she decided to speak. "It's not always easy to explain why we choose the paths we take," she began, her voice soft but filled with a silent wisdom. "Sometimes, life pushes us down roads we didn't plan, and we find ourselves fighting for things we never thought would be so hard to obtain." Christian listened intently, without interrupting. "I came from Mexico 5 years ago," she continued. "I had a husband there. At first, everything was beautiful, or so I thought. But soon the pressure started. He humiliated me, despised me because I couldn't give him a child. I was married to him for 3 years. And during those years, all he told me was that my worth as a woman depended on whether or not I could be a mother." She paused for a moment, her gaze lost in painful memories. "When the diagnosis finally came, infertility fell upon me like a sentence. My marriage crumbled, not because I wanted it to, but because he couldn't see me as anything other than a failure. He left me for that, for not being able to meet the expectations society placed on a woman. I was left alone, my dignity shattered, but also with the certainty that I wasn't going to let anyone else define my worth." Christian felt a knot form in his throat. Jaime's words reached him like an uncomfortable truth he had never faced. He couldn't imagine what she had been through. "With the money I got after the divorce, I decided that if I was going to be a mother, I would do it on my own terms," she said, now with more determination. "I came here to the United States and invested everything I had in that insemination. It was a risk, I know, but when life pushes you to the edge, you have to decide whether to jump with fear or with faith." She paused again, breathing deeply. "That's how my quadruplets were born, Christian. They're all I have in life. They're my reason to live, my strength. Everything I've done since then has been to fight for them. I wasn't looking for a man to provide for them or to save me. I was looking for something greater than my own pain." Christian sat silently, impressed not only by her story, but by the calm and power with which she told it. He had never met anyone like her. He had been surrounded by people who valued money, superficial beauty, quick success. But Jaime spoke with a depth he had never understood until now. "You know," she said with a slight smile, though her eyes were wet, "sometimes life breaks you so you can rebuild yourself in a stronger way. Those who only see what shines on the surface never understand that. But those who have known darkness, they know that true gold lies buried under layers of dust. My children are that gold, Christian. and no matter how they came into this world, they are my greatest treasure." Silence returned to the car, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding. And while the children played innocently in the back seat, Christian Wellesley, for the first time in years, felt something inside him shift, as if a veil of superficiality had been lifted from his life, revealing a truth he had never sought and had never been interested in finding. The dense silence was broken by the soft squeak of the Lamborghini's tires as they stopped in front of an imposing mansion. The tall, wrought-iron gates opened automatically, revealing an extensive property surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. The children jumped out of the car with boundless energy, running and laughing along the tree-lined paths surrounding the house. "Kids, wait!" Jaime exclaimed, trying in vain to impose some order. "Watch out for the gardens!" But her attempt was futile. The four little ones ran without stopping, excited by the vast green space around them. Jamie, a little embarrassed by her lack of control over them, looked at Christian as if seeking an apology, but found him watching the scene with a faint, mysterious smile on his face. "Let them be happy," he said, with a calmness that surprised her. "They've arrived at their father's house." The phrase hung in the air, strange yet somehow endearing. Jaime looked at him, perplexed. There was something odd in his words, yet at the same time, there was a deep meaning behind them that she couldn't decipher. "Why did you bring us here, Christian?" she asked, still confused. "You said it was life or death. What does all this mean?" Christian looked at her for a moment, maintaining his air of mystery. Then he simply extended his hand and said in a softer tone, "Follow me, Jaime. Bring the children." With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, Jaime called the children, and while they continued running excitedly, this time following Christian, she followed them into the mansion. They walked through the majestic marble lobby, surrounded by columns and luxurious artwork. And as their steps echoed through the vastness of the house, Christian said nothing. But his demeanor conveyed a gravity that Jaime couldn't ignore. After walking down a long carpeted hallway, Christian stopped in front of a peculiar-looking door, older than the others. He opened it slowly, revealing a room dimly lit by a lamp beside an old bed. "Is that you, Christian?" a trembling voice called from within the room. The voice belonged to an elderly woman of about 80, with white hair, seated on the bed, her body frail and her eyes clouded by age. She seemed to have very little sight, but there was something in her expression that showed an inner strength despite her physical state. Christian stepped toward the woman, and his face changed completely. The hardness and control that always accompanied him disappeared, revealing a vulnerability Jaime hadn't perceived during their journey. "She's my grandmother," Christian whispered to Jaime. "She raised me since I was a child." Silence filled the space again, but this time it was a silence filled with repressed emotions. Jaime felt she was about to witness something deeply personal and profound, something beyond the wealth and power Christian usually projected. Christian approached his grandmother's bed, took her hand gently, and spoke with a tenderness that surprised Jaime. "Grandma, I don't want you to leave this world without fulfilling your greatest wish," Christian said, his voice breaking slightly. "I haven't brought you just one great-grandchild. I've brought you 4 identical ones." The elderly woman's eyes, though barely able to see, opened wide, and a silent tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. The emotion in the room was palpable, as if time had stopped. "4," the grandmother whispered, trying to process her grandson's words. "My great-grandchildren." Christian nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he held his grandmother's. Jaime, feeling the weight of the moment, walked over to the elderly woman, and with a tenderness that came from the depths of her being, knelt beside the bed. She took the woman's other hand in hers and spoke softly, her heart in every word. "Yes, ma'am. They are your great-grandchildren. They were born with all the love in the world. They have been the light in my life, and now they are part of yours as well." The grandmother, moved by Jaime's words, squeezed her hands with the little strength she had left. "My dear daughter," said the elderly woman with a faint voice that, though weak, resonated with the strength of truth. Her eyes shone with the wisdom of time. "The life you have brought to this home is a gift beyond measure. I don't know how these children came to you. I don't know how heaven conspired to unite your heart with these little ones. But I feel in the deepest part of me that your love was destined for them long before the wind whispered their names. For I see in your eyes the tenderness that only true love can offer. You have been the river that has brought new life to this land, and in every smile of those little ones, the universe's gratitude is written. And for that, my gratitude to you knows no bounds. And now, I bless you from the depths of my heart." Tears filled Jaime's eyes, but her smile didn't fade. It was an unexpected yet beautiful moment. The connection that had just formed between her and the grandmother was profound, beyond blood. Christian, still contemplative, smiled silently. For the first time in his life, he felt his heart beat with something more than the frantic rhythm of business and success. He felt a warm heartbeat, filled with peace, telling him that perhaps he had been searching for something all along, something he only now began to understand. The children, who had been watching curiously from the doorway, hurried toward the bed and carefully nestled beside their great-grandmother, wrapping her with their small, caring hands. The elderly woman, surrounded by these 4 little ones who symbolized the future of her lineage, smiled with tenderness. "Now I know I can go peacefully," the grandmother whispered, looking at Christian with a glimmer of love and peace, "because I see that you have found what truly matters." Jaime, deeply moved, leaned forward and kissed the elderly woman's hand, silently sealing a promise of love and family that, though unexpected, now belonged to them all. "And what are their names, dear? What are the names of these angels you've brought into my life?" the grandmother asked, her voice full of tender tranquility and a gentle whisper. Jaime, with a smile full of the unconditional love her children inspired in her, answered, her voice imbued with a solemn tone. Each of them bears a name with a profound meaning. Amandil is the first. It means that love is the force that conquers all. Leora, the second, is the light that always finds its way, even in the darkest corners. Zahara, my third, is the eternal miracle, the manifestation of the divine in the everyday. Yamatus is endless love, the kind that never runs out, the love that remains forever. The grandmother, deeply moved, took the children's small hands with infinite sweetness, while Christian, who had remained silent until then, felt a tear roll down his cheek. He had never experienced a moment so authentic, so full of truth. Before him were not just 4 children, but the promise of something eternal, something he had always longed for, without even knowing it. That night, after the moving scene with his grandmother, Christian knew he couldn't let Jaime and the children return to the small home where they lived. While they were sitting in the mansion's spacious living room, the children dozing on his lap and Jaime looking around curiously, Christian broke the silence. "I want you to stay here," Christian said, with a calmness that tried not to sound domineering. "This mansion has more than enough space, and I don't want you to go back to that tiny place you're renting. Don't worry about your things or the children's belongings. I can buy everything you need, brand new. Early tomorrow, we'll go shopping. But tonight, I want you all to be comfortable." Jaime looked at him, slightly puzzled by his generosity, but she knew he was speaking with sincerity that couldn't be ignored. Her life had been a constant struggle, and this man, with all his flaws, seemed to offer something more than mere wealth. He seemed to offer authenticity as a human being. "Material things don't always bring happiness, Christian," she said gently, stroking the children. "But I understand that sometimes we need to accept what is offered with gratitude. Because love isn't only measured by what we give, but also by what we accept." Christian nodded, moved by her words. Without further ado, he called a maid and asked her to set them up in one of the mansion's most luxurious suites. Meanwhile, the children, waking up, ran to him. "Look, Mom!" they shouted amidst laughter, as they each hugged Christian's legs, competing with each other. "I'm hugging him the tightest." "No, I'm hugging him the tightest," another little one argued, pressing against him. Christian, unable to hold back any longer, let out tears of pure happiness. He hugged them all tightly, feeling a warmth in his heart he had never experienced. "Go to rest," he said, smiling through his tears. "Tomorrow will be a very special day." Jaime watched from a distance, seeing this man, the same one who at first had seemed a distant stranger, transform before her eyes. It was as if the love those children radiated had softened him, revealing someone completely different. The next morning arrived with the radiance of a bright sun, and Christian, Jaime, and the quadruplets embarked on what would prove to be an incredibly special day. The first stop was at a high-end boutique where the children, as well as Jaime, tried on new clothes in vibrant colors and soft textures, thrilled with each garment they tried on. After choosing everything they needed, they headed to a luxurious restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, where they enjoyed lunch filled with laughter and play. "You know, Christian," Jaime said as the children laughed in the background, "it's not material things that make this day shine so brightly in our hearts," Jaime whispered. "It's the happiness that flows from within, the laughter of the children rising like a song. In every moment of shared peace and love, we find the true treasures that time can never take away. That's what truly matters." Christian looked at her, admiring her wisdom. "You're right. Material things were always there, but moments like this were not." After lunch, they went to an amusement park where the children enjoyed swings, carousels, slides, and mini trains, their laughter echoing all around. The afternoon culminated with a visit to a famous ice cream parlor, where Christian, Jaime, and the children gathered together to enjoy huge ice cream sundaes, exchanging knowing glances and smiles full of satisfaction. When they returned to the mansion, the atmosphere felt peaceful, but as they entered the foyer, something unexpected awaited them. Standing at the end of the room was an elegant figure, a woman who stood out with her poise and refinement. She wore an expensive fur coat and glittered with expensive jewelry adorning her neck and ears. Her hair was perfectly styled in a sophisticated updo, as if she had just stepped off a European runway. Christian stopped dead upon seeing her. His face instantly paled. "Who is this elegant lady, Christian?" Jaime asked, surprised and not understanding the tension in the air, visible on the father of her children's face. Christian didn't respond. He was paralyzed, unable to articulate a word. The woman, sensing the discomfort of the situation and immediately noticing the resemblance between the quadruplets and Christian, decided to intervene with a calculated smile. "Let me answer for him, dear, as he seems too thrilled to see me to speak," said the woman, taking a step forward. "I'm Emilia Mendez Ortiz, the famous fashion designer and Christian's fiancée. I've come to marry him." The room seemed to freeze in that instant, and Christian's heart stopped completely. Christian felt the air leave his lungs upon hearing Emilia's words. It was as if time had frozen, and the echo of the woman's statement thundered in the room like a storm. "Wait a moment. What are you saying?" he exclaimed, taking a step forward, his eyes fixed on Emilia. "We haven't agreed on any wedding date. You know I'm not a marrying man. I don't like formalities or commitment." Emilia, unfazed, let out a sarcastic laugh as her eyes swept over the children, and then settled on Jaime with a mix of mockery and disdain. "In a moment you'll change your mind, love," she responded in a cutting tone. "But hold on, who is this humble-looking woman? And who are these 4 children who look so much like you?" The question made Christian hesitate. He couldn't find words. The knot in his throat prevented him from responding, and for a moment, he felt the ground give way beneath his feet. Before he could articulate a response, Jaime stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm Jaime Rodriguez, ma'am," she replied firmly, "and these are my children." She paused deliberately, looking directly at Emilia and then at Christian. "Correction, ma'am. These are our children. The quadruplets have a wonderful father. I assure you, your fiancé is a great father." Her words landed like a bombshell in the room. Emilia's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as the color drained from her face. "What? Christian is their father?" she repeated incredulously, her voice rising with each word. "When? A distinguished man like him would never take an interest in a woman as humble as you. It's no secret that Christian has always only had romances with the most sophisticated and glamorous women of high society. Though of course I stand out among them all," she added, adjusting a stray hair in her impeccable hairstyle. "Our relationship has lasted a year, the longest he's had, given that I am the love of his life. An extraordinary woman." Christian felt a whirlwind of emotion stirring within him. His gaze shifted between Emilia, who continued projecting that arrogant aura of security, and Jaime, whose eyes showed a mix of defiance and vulnerability. With effort, he gathered the courage to interrupt. "Answer my question, Emilia," Christian demanded, his tone harsher than usual. "Where do you get the idea that we're getting married?" Emilia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the sofa with the elegance of someone accustomed to being the center of attention on a runway. She took her luxurious purse, opened it, and pulled out an envelope. From it, she extracted an ultrasound, which she held up to Christian with a calculated smile before handing it to him. "This, love," she said in a venomous whisper. "We're expecting 3 children." She then loosened her coat and slowly revealed her belly, which was beginning to show the characteristic roundness of pregnancy. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as Jaime, still calm, addressed Emilia. "You know, ma'am," she said in a soft but firm voice, "the worth of a person is not measured by the wealth they flaunt, but by the purity of their heart and the strength of their love. Sometimes true gold isn't what shines, but what lies hidden, waiting to be found by those who know how to look beyond the surface." Then, without waiting for a reply, Jaime turned to Christian. Her expression softened as she looked at her children. "I'm going to take the children to their room so they can rest. I think you need space for your wedding preparations," she said, her voice barely trembling on the last word. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to stifle the air. The little ones looked on with curiosity, holding Jaime's hand as she began to climb the stairs. But just as she reached the first step, Christian broke the silence. "Stop, Jaime!" he called, his voice full of urgency. "Don't go!" Emilia stepped forward, her tone filled with indignation. "What are you begging this poor woman for, Christian?" she interrupted coldly. "There's no reason for her to stay and listen to such an intimate conversation between us, who have so much to celebrate, my love." Christian looked at her, his expression hardening. "This needs to be clarified, Emilia," he replied with a firm tone. "How are you pregnant with my child?" Emilia raised her chin haughtily. "There's nothing to clarify. It's very simple. We are a couple in love. It happened the night before I left for Paris," she said with evident contempt. "Better yet, clarify for me how you have quadruplets with this vagabond. Actually, let's just forget about that foolish thing you did years ago with this poor woman and focus on celebrating all that awaits us, future husband." Jaime squeezed her children's small hands tightly. Her gaze shifted from Christian to Amelia, then back to the man, who still seemed caught in a whirlwind of emotions. With a decisive gesture, she took the first step to leave, though she was determined to speak first. "Christian, you are a wonderful man, and never forget this. These are our children," she said, indicating the little ones. "Amandil, Amatus, Leora, and Zahara. They are the most important thing in my life, and now they are part of yours too. Whatever you decide, nothing will change this wonderful parenthood as long as you wish it with all your heart. For now, I must go." She paused and looked directly at Amelia with unshakable calm. "As for you, ma'am, remember that sometimes the richest soul doesn't wear silk or carry jewels, but is forged by the love and strength that arise from adversity. Perhaps one day you'll understand that." Jaime turned and began to ascend the steps, but before she could fully retreat, a familiar sound echoed through the room. It was the creak of a walker. Christian's grandmother, usually confined to her room, nearly bedridden in the despair of her old age and loneliness, slowly advanced with unsure but firm steps. She had decided to get up, driven by the joy the 4 great-grandchildren Christian had unexpectedly brought home the day before had brought her. The elderly woman stopped at the room's entrance. Her voice resonated with unusual firmness. "What is going on here?" Then, watching Jaime as she climbed the stairs with her great-grandchildren, she issued a clear command. "Come back here immediately with my great-grandchildren, for this is my mansion, and therefore, this is your place." Jaime, with a smile and tear-filled eyes, slowly began descending the steps, with the quadruplets playing among themselves, laughing innocently about who could go down the fastest. The elderly woman asked again, "Christian, do you want to tell me what is happening here?" Christian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the situation. Confusion and tension overwhelmed him, but he knew he had to respond. "Grandma, Amelia says she's expecting 3 children," he replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "She claims she's pregnant with my children, but I don't understand how that's possible, and she's talking about setting a wedding date." Amelia, sensing the moment slipping away, approached Christian and took his arm, trying to smooth the situation with a calculated smile. "Christian, love, what matters is that we're expecting 3 babies," she said in a sweet tone, trying to sound conciliatory. "This is a reason to be happy, not to question. We've overcome so much together." The grandmother fixed her gaze on Amelia, her expression hardening. Something in her eyes revealed that she wouldn't be easily convinced. She took a breath and replied firmly. "That's not true," said the grandmother, her voice breaking momentarily but then regaining its strength. "Emilia, you cannot be expecting any children from my grandson." The room fell into complete silence as the grandmother's words resonated with an unexpected force. Christian looked at his grandmother, bewildered, unable to fully grasp what he had just heard. Amelia, her face pale with shock, released Christian's arm, unable to immediately respond. "How can you say that, old woman?" Amelia stammered, her confidence faltering for the first time. "What are you implying? Are you calling me a liar, or do you prefer this vagabond over me to continue your lineage?" The grandmother, supported by her walker, stepped forward with an expression that mixed relief and severity. She replied, looking into the fashion designer's eyes, the woman engaged to her grandson, with pride and confidence. "I'll answer your 2 questions, Emilia, in the same order. Yes, I am calling you a liar. And yes, I would rather have a homeless woman over you to continue my lineage." Then her eyes, filled with wisdom that only life and experience could provide, turned to Christian, as if she were about to reveal a truth he didn't know she knew. "As for you, Christian, my dear grandson," she began, her tone gentle yet laden with an undeniable authority. 3 years ago, you suffered a severe testicular condition that required surgical intervention to correct. I know you spoke to the doctors about a preventative vasectomy, taking advantage of the situation since you didn't want children, nor ties, nor formal commitments. You did all that vasectomy business without telling me. Christian felt a chill run down his spine. Images from that hospital time began to swirl in his mind. It had been a complicated time when pressure and fear of commitment drove him to get a vasectomy. He didn't want bonds or the risk of an unwanted child. His grandmother had been there, though he thought she didn't know everything. "Grandma," he murmured, his eyes filled with confusion. "How do you know? I always thought you only knew about the corrective testicular surgery. Nothing else?" The elderly woman nodded, gently squeezing the walker with her trembling hands. "I always knew, Christian. I knew because I was with you when the doctors explained your condition, and I saw that spark in your eyes when you planned to do something behind my back. You were always like that since you were a child. That's why I later met with the doctors confidentially and discreetly. The vasectomy was your decision, and I respected it, though it plunged me into deep pain, which you dispelled only yesterday, when this beautiful girl brought your 4 children to bring light to this home and restore my life." Her words softened, yet remained firm. "I also know that you never reversed that operation, because I always kept track of you without you realizing it. I know you can't have biological children anymore since you did nothing to change that. I had hoped for the miracle that you would reverse that vasectomy, but it never happened. However," she said, smiling at Jaime, "the miracle happened another way, 5 years ago, in this beautiful woman with the most beautiful children my eyes have ever seen." Christian felt the ground beneath his feet beginning to crumble. The truth his grandmother had just revealed hit him like a wave. He had hurt her with his selfish decisions without realizing it. Silence was interrupted by Amelia's rapid breathing as she tried to regain her composure. "This is absurd," she shouted, desperate to cling to her lie. "She doesn't know what she's saying. I am pregnant with Christian. I have proof in this ultrasound." The grandmother, with a penetrating gaze, shook her head slowly. "You cannot be," she stated calmly. "Not after what he decided to do." Jaime, who had been observing silently, took a deep breath. She decided to step forward, looking at Christian with empathy. She knew he was facing a hard truth, but also believed he had the strength to overcome it. "Christian, all this is a lot for you," she began gently, placing a hand on his arm. "You didn't expect to be a father, and I understand that your past decisions were based on how you felt then. But these children are real. They are part of you in a way neither of us could have foreseen." Christian felt a surge of emotion as he looked at his children. The 4 little ones played carefree, unaware of the emotional storm swirling around the adults. He slowly knelt down, observing their innocent faces, identical to his own. A tear rolled down his cheek as he gently caressed one child's head. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice broken by emotion. "I didn't know this was possible. I didn't know I could love someone this much without seeking it." The grandmother smiled from her place, watching her grandson with pride. She had feared that Christian would close himself off to love, but now she saw he was beginning to open his heart to accept what life, in all its complexity, had given him. Christian stood up, a new determination shining in his eyes. He looked at Amelia. His expression was no longer one of uncertainty, but of resolve. "This is over, Amelia," he declared, his voice clear and firm. "I don't know how you invented this lie, but you cannot be pregnant with me. My grandmother is right about everything she revealed, and you have no place here." Amelia, defeated and furious, cast one last hateful look before turning and leaving the room, saying, "I should have stayed in Paris. At least the father of my children, though a foolish pauper unworthy of me, a reckless fling on a night of drinks, does appreciate a woman like me, unlike you? Enjoy your miserable vagabond." Christian, still moved, turned his gaze back to Jaime and his grandmother. He knew his life had changed forever. However, he was now ready to accept that responsibility. "Jaime," he said, his voice trembling but sincere. "I know I've made mistakes, and I know this is difficult. But if you give me the chance, I want to be the father these children need. And I also want to be a part of their lives and yours. You're simply perfect. I feel like I've known you my whole life. I love you, Jaime." Jaime looked at him for a long moment before smiling softly. "Each day, just as the sun rises, life offers you a new opportunity, Christian," she replied with serenity. "We can be reborn together." The grandmother, with tears of pride and joy, took a step forward to join them. The children, not fully understanding what was happening, came closer, surrounding Christian and Jaime. In that moment, Christian knew he had found something more valuable than any fortune: a family, and the promise of a future full of love. In an intimate celebration a couple of weeks later, the most beautiful wedding imaginable took place. In the midst of the most genuine feelings two people can express, Christian became a more human man, realizing that one should never judge a book by its cover and understanding the old adage that says, "Wealth is not in what we possess, but in who we are." De Ralph Waldo Emerson. If you want to help street animals, it's very simple. Just subscribe, give a like, and share this story on WhatsApp. Leave your name in the comments so I can send you a personalized greeting.